Welcome back, everyone, and I hope you're all doing well. If you're new here, I live full-time in my 4Runner, traveling around the country, taking landscape photos and making videos like this one, which is why I'm standing here on my old college campus in Florida, so that I don't freeze to death. Anyways, in this video, we're going to be talking about 5 tips to take better photos with your drone. Let's dive in. Okay, so we're going to start off by making sure you've got all your settings right to maximize image quality. The first thing is to make sure you're shooting in RAW format. Without getting into too many of the technical aspects, RAW files are larger and less compressed, meaning you have more flexibility when you sit down to edit them, which we'll get to later in this video. You should always keep your ISO as low as possible, unless it's the last setting you have available to change for a brighter exposure. ISO has a direct correlation to your final image quality, thus increasing it will negatively impact your image. And because some drones can't change their aperture, it means shutter speed is typically the primary setting for controlling exposure. In my experience, as long as you don't go below 1/10 of a second, your images will be sharp. If you can change your aperture, you can lower this before going too low on your shutter speed without much worry. While aperture typically dictates the amount of stuff in your scene that's in focus, because we're so far away from our subjects most of the time, shooting with such a wide field of view, you can safely change your aperture without much worry. However, do keep this in mind for those rare times you might have something close up. White balance. Typically, I leave this on auto, but it's not a setting you have to put much effort and focus into as long as you shoot in RAW. The last thing is aspect ratio. Always select the largest aspect ratio because anything smaller, such as 16:9, is simply just going to crop your image that you might want to edit later. Alright, so the next tip is likely the quickest and easiest way to drastically improve your images you're taking on your drone. AEB stands for Auto Exposure Bracketing. I've broken down everything you could want to know about exposure bracketing in this video if you're interested, but for the sake of time, here's the bullet points. Drones have small sensors compared to a professional camera. This means they capture less light and have lower dynamic range. A way to fix this is by taking multiple images at different exposures and combining them together, effectively increasing the dynamic range. Many modern day phones do this for you automatically, so you've likely already been using this technology without even knowing it. The effect is more data to work with in your final images. AEB allows you to choose from taking 3 or 5 images per photo. If you select 3, every time you take an image, you're going to take one that's -1 EV, 0, and +1 EV. Selecting 5 will give you the same thing except a -2 and a +2 EV photo as well. You'll want to select the 5-shot option as this gives you the most range and data. Just remember that when you set this, every time you take a single photo, it's actually taking 5 images. Alright, so now that you've set up your AEB to 5 and taken some photos, it's time to open up Lightroom or your editing software of choice and combine them into an HDR image. To do this, select your images, right-click, Photo Merge, HDR. Select Auto Adjustments, no ghosting or light, it's up to your preference, and create a stack for organization purposes. This will give you a 6th image that you can now adjust with a lot more flexibility in editing. Now that we've increased the dynamic range of our drone's camera to the levels of professional mirrorless cameras, the only big difference left is resolution, which we can also do very easily. All we need to do is take a grid-style panorama to effectively increase our image's resolution. But wait, don't go changing your settings just yet. You will not be using the built-in panorama feature on your drone. This method won't always work depending on your shot. For example, those top-down shots of patterns and shadows typically don't work well with panos. But for all those big scenes in front of you, it's quite easy. You'll want to find your shot and then get a little bit closer to it so that it overflows outside of your frame. Then you'll take a grid of 4 or 9 or even more images, just making sure you overlap each image by about 30 or 40%. This will make stitching later easier. No matter how many images you're taking, you can follow the method to start in the top left of your scene, taking images until you reach the right side of your image. Then, angle your gimbal down, keeping in mind to overlap 30 to 40% of the images, and take images from right back to left. Do this for however large your pattern needs to be. 95% of the time for me, this is a grid of just 4 images. Don't change any settings in between your images, but do make sure you're using that AEB for larger dynamic ranges. Also, you don't always have to keep a square grid of images. Many times I'll take a vertical composition and I'll take 3 to 5 images just pitching the gimbal angle up and down. The entire idea is just to get a little bit closer to your subject and create a larger final image. So once you've taken your images, all you have to do is the exact same thing we did for the AEB part. Head into Lightroom, select the images in your panorama, go to Photo Merge, HDR Panorama if you took AEB shots, or just Panorama if you didn't. You'll be presented with 3 different render choices. I suggest just clicking on each one and seeing which one you prefer because every image will be different. Next, boundary warp your image to your liking and make sure you create a stack that's checked just so you can keep those images more organized. That's it. Now you've got a large pixel image with lots of detail and data. The next step is probably the easiest possible thing you can do to get better images. Golden hour is that time of day, typically about an hour after sunrise and an hour before sunset. It will give you a lot more dramatic shadows, long shadows cascading on a scene, colored clouds, and unique atmosphere. There isn't much to be said here. Every human alive, photographer or not, knows the power and the beauty of a sunrise or sunset. So just push yourself to be out there at those times with your drone in the air. Hey, part of the interruption, I just wanted to say if you wanted to support me in more ways than liking and subscribing to this channel, you can do that with a little link down below where you can find things like my upcoming workshops in Oregon, Texas, and Colorado. You can also check out the link to find my editing companion that's built into Lightroom that we're using on this very video, or you can just support me by donating a cup of coffee or maybe signing up for my Patreon. Thanks for checking it out. Let's get back to the video. A quick bonus point before we dive into editing is that shooting during golden hour is one of the first things you learn in landscape photography. And in the same breath, just learning a few basic compositional techniques will improve your images. There's something special about drone photography, except that it's a tool that gives you new perspectives, thus all the rules you would learn from a coffee table photography book still apply. So spend some time learning them, which you should do, or could do, right here on this channel. Okay, so the last tip might be one of the most important and also one many people taking photos on their drone tend to skip: editing your images. Now, I don't have a lot of time to teach you editing. Depending on your skill levels, you'll just need to approach this at your own pace. What I can say is that there's no special editing rules for drone photography, just like I said before. So if you're having a hard time learning editing because you're approaching it with only drones in mind, branch out and simply look for landscape photography editing videos, such as this one right here. Let's jump into Lightroom and edit a photo together. All right, so like I said before, we don't have time to learn everything there is to know about editing, but I wanted to take the next 5 minutes to show you how important editing can be for those images that you're going to take on your drone. I'm going to be using my Lightroom Editing Companion, which is this thing I've integrated into Lightroom, but also has this companion guide, and it kind of teaches you a workflow through editing when editing isn't really a linear workflow, especially for landscapes. I'll be using that through this guide, and I'm not going to necessarily explain what everything I'm doing because we just don't have time. A lot of these different techniques I have an entire video on that you can check out on this channel, but for now I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly and you can kind of follow my process about what I'm doing. So let's jump into Lightroom. Okay, so on the left hand side you're going to see my editing guide over here, and we're going to go through that really quick. So the first thing to do is I'm going to check my black levels, how much detail I have in my shadows. I'm going to check my whites, how much detail I have in those highlights. I'm going to do some spot removal and cleanup for this image. We're not going to do that. And then I'm going to do my white balance and profile. Normally this applies a color profile here in Lightroom, but because I use this DNG from the Mavic 3, I don't have the color profiles that Adobe normally has. This does work on my Mavic 2. It's just something that Adobe has to add, or maybe I just need to do an update and I'll have it. That's okay though. Really all I care about right now is getting the white balance for this image correct. Let's brighten up the whole image right now because it's kind of hard to see. And this is looking pretty good. We're going to come back to this step. The next thing is I'm going to do my calibration and HSL fix. This is going to come down here to my calibration. We're going to increase this to about 50-ish and about -8 on the hue here. We're going to come up here to our saturation for blue and make sure it is decreased. That's looking pretty good. The next thing is going to be the tone curve adjustment, and I can actually come in here and increase the contrast or decrease the contrast. You're going to see that reflect over here on my tone curve. For now, we're going to definitely want something in the strong contrast range. And the next thing is my histogram adjustment. All this setting is doing is reminding me to try to get things in value. So right now we can definitely tell there's way too much blown out in the sky. So maybe I want to bring down my highlights just a little bit and bring up my shadows a little bit. And you can see how much detail is in this image because of that giant HDR image we combined together earlier. That's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to come down here and look at my build, my edit tabs. The first thing I want to do is try to balance this sky. So I'm going to go to my sky balance mask here and my companion, and it's going to look a little bit too crunchy, I would say. So we're going to go into our masks. I'm going to go to my selected sky and graduated neutral density sky. These two are just two masks that this particular preset creates. For now, I'm going to turn off my G&D sky, and we're only going to work with the selected sky, and that created a mask that automatically selects the sky in Lightroom. And I'm going to come in here and adjust that to be a little bit lighter in touch. That's looking pretty good. And then I'm going to turn my G&D sky back on, reposition it here in the image, and then we're going to reset it a little bit. And I'm going to bring down my exposure just a little bit more and my highlights a touch. I kind of want this area to look a little bright, so maybe we don't want to bring that down so much. And the other thing is it's not looking warm enough, but the whole image probably needs to be warmed up. So let's actually warm up the whole image first. That's probably a little too warm. I think 5800 is looking pretty good. Okay, let's go back to balancing that sky. I definitely want it to be a little bit brighter in that centerpiece and kind of look blown out on purpose, because if I bring it down too much, you just end up getting this really crunchy look, and I don't like that. And I kind of like the way the sky is super bright. I think that's looking decent. Let's add a little bit of dehaze here. That's looking pretty good. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is add a little bit more emphasis here on the middle of the image, obviously the middle of the stadium. I'm going to do that with my focus light mask here. And all this does is create a big radial filter in my image and applies a bit of an effect that we're going to change. I'm just going to reshape this radial filter, center it right, maybe a little bit here since it should be a little bit brighter here than over here. And obviously I'm doing this pretty quick and loose. I might spend more time on this for my own edit, but for posterity's sake of this video, I'm going to come here and check out some of the settings that this mask automatically creates. And I think these are actually pretty good. We can probably increase the whites just a little bit more and maybe the shadows a little bit more. Let's just increase the exposure first, actually. And that's looking okay. That's looking okay. Let's make this a little bit bigger so it's affecting more of the stadium. And then now that we've brightened that up, let's go through our main image and darken the main image down just a little bit. Because remember, we brightened it up earlier so that we could see what we were doing. And I think this is looking pretty good. Now, the next thing I want to do is my final crop step down here. This is after I've finished editing, but I can always go back and change things if I want to. You'll notice that this bottom right part is a little too skewed. This is something I'd probably go into Photoshop to fix. You can also notice that the horizon line here that I've already straightened a little bit is not perfectly straight. And that's because of combining those images together in that panoramic image, but I would normally just go into Photoshop and straighten that out. But again, for time's sake, just know that this is what you can do in editing if you need to. So what I'm going to do is actually crop a little bit of the bottom of the image out to get rid of some of that skewed area and crop this part out. And I think that's looking pretty good. Maybe a little bit more of the sky to where it touches that cloud. And yeah, okay, so let's create one more radial mask. I'm going to go in here, create a radial gradient. For just the field, I want to add just a touch more, just a little bit more light there. Not very much. Just a little bit. Yeah, I like the way that looks. So then I'm going to come down here. I'm going to make sure all my colors are balanced. I'm going to manage my white balance. Obviously, this highlight is not what you're supposed to do. This is just telling you or reminding you, hey, check your white balance again. Make sure your colors look good. And I still think it looks a little bit too blue in the shadows. So I'm actually going to warm it up even more. It's going to look a little extra warm, but that's okay. I kind of like that warm look for sunset anyways. Then I'm going to choose to sharpen in Lightroom. That's going to add my sharpening effects, which is just adding some sharpening in Lightroom. And we're going to zoom in here, make sure it all looks good. There's a ton of detail in this image because it's that 6-shot panorama we took with all of the different exposures. And then I'm going to step away from the image and check to make sure that my eyes reset. I walk away, I come back. For example, right now I'm sitting here editing in daylight outside, and I know that my eyes are adjusted to be outside. So normally I would like to edit inside in a dark room so that I can see my exposures and get used to those at the same setting every single time. But because I live in my car, I don't really have that option. Anyways, that's the edit. That's using my Lightroom editing companion. But for the most part, I just wanted to show you how important it is to edit your images, because we can go from this to this in just a couple minutes with a few different touches. You could use a lot of the techniques that I showed you, or you can check out my companion video that's linked above. All right, so that's all I have for you on this one. If you've mastered the tips in the first part of this video to enhance your technical aspects of your images, all that's left is to get out there, get your drone in the air, and keep taking some photos. Lovely to have you all here, and as always, you can like the video if you liked it. Consider subscribing if you loved it. There's got to be a rainbow out there somewhere. We just got to go find it. Later. All right. Whew.